Well, hello and welcome. Thanks for coming in tonight. It's Thursday night at Suburban Homesteader, Wyoming, Arizona, and it is Thursday Night Live. And we are talking about lettuce tonight. Lots of different kinds of lettuce. Lettuce that you grow, lettuce that you eat, lettuce that you like. But first of all, let's say hi to Troy. We've been having a conversation. He just planted some tomatoes in his hydroponics, and I was asking him what kind he planted. Those hillbillies, oh man, that's a good tomato. I like the color, I like the texture, I like the taste. It's a great, um, seriously great tomato. I like the other ones too. Julie is in. I have a volunteer cherry in one planter. The big bed is healing from nematodes. Ooh, those nematodes. That so that many, so so that may be the only tomato plant this year. Wow. Oh my gosh, it's not supposed to say tomatoes. Well, I guess we're switching. We're going to talk about tomatoes instead. Because I'm going to go over to another little thing to make sure I came in on the right one. Because for sure I thought I was talking about lettuce tonight. That's what I got on my sheet. Lettuce. I'm looking up on my sheet right there. Week 1, lettuce. So perhaps I did. We're talking about tomatoes tonight. I'm going to have to switch that around. So obviously when I scheduled it, I put those in a different date. So let's just throw all those notes away. So we're talking about tomatoes, which is really funny because I did a short this morning. And Julie, thanks for keeping me on track. I would have been talking about lettuce bolting, but doing much better than the tomato situation. Musgrave Farm, hello, how are ya? So, on my list, I have a bulletin board right above my computer here. And it says that I'm supposed to be talking about lettuce. But obviously, I'm not talking about lettuce. I'm talking about tomatoes. So, when I scheduled it, I just switched those around. That's okay. I love tomatoes. I could talk all day about tomatoes. It's one of those things that I grow always. And Troy's growing different ones in hydroponics. Julie's got one that's a volunteer cherry that has come up. I brought tomatoes down to Arizona in a seed snail. And I planted some in the back, some in the front, and some at my dad's house. Well, I put all my pink accordions over at my dad's. And so I picked one of them today. And those babies are just honking. It fills up my entire hand. I should have brought it in here because I thought I was talking about lettuce, though, so I didn't. That's just so funny. But that's just the way life is. Life is not always what you expect it to be. So I planted it at my parents' house, 2 different accordions. Why did I choose those at my parents' house? One, my dad loves a big tomato. He loves slicers of tomatoes. So any of the accordions, the red, the pink, the orange, I think those are the only 3 accordion tomatoes that there are. They're very meaty, but the reason why they're called accordion is because it goes in and out all the way around the tomatoes. So like an accordion. But they're very meaty inside. So all I did was tell Mom and Dad, you'll love these tomatoes, and you just have to give me one because I want to save the seeds again, because I save seeds every year from tomatoes that I grow. And so Mom says today, you better pick one of those tomatoes. So I went out and picked one, fit right in the palm of my hand. You can see the short from this morning. And I'm going to let it ripen a little bit more. Then I'll slice it. I'm going to scoop out a bunch of the seeds to save, and then we'll just enjoy the tomato. So let's talk about growing your own tomatoes. Why would you do it? What's the point? You can go to the grocery store and buy tomatoes. Why in the world would you uh, paint? Why in the world would you plant your own tomatoes? What's the benefit of that? And I am going to switch one thing, and I'm going to hide that before we keep talking. Um, the reason why, most of the time, now there are ones that say vine ripened. I question that. Anytime I taste them in the store, but they're probably more ripe than other ones. When you get tomatoes in the wintertime, for the most part, they pick those green. They go into coolers, and then when they're ready to ship them out to the stores, they put ethylene gas in the chamber and it ripens them. So you look like this beautiful red tomato. Tasteless, but they look like a beautiful tomato. If I'm going to buy a tomato in the store, I'm going to go to their organic section. 2 reasons. One, I can get an organic tomato that should taste fairly good, even though it isn't from the store. Second, if I do like them, I can save some of those seeds and try to grow those. The interesting thing about tomatoes, in the flower, it has both male and female parts, and so it doesn't actually need a pollinator. Sometimes you'll see bumblebees go into a tomato flower, but regular bees have a hard time, but they don't really need it. The wind will pollinate them. They just shake, and that pollen just has to drop a quarter of an inch and it will pollinate. So if you've got a tomato plant and you're not getting very many tomatoes, I take an electric toothbrush, I put it on the back side of the flower, and I just vibrate it for a little while. And that forces that pollen to drop down. And sometimes you can even see some pollen fall out of the flower because it's vibrating. And so when it's tomato season, I just go around every morning and I got my electric toothbrush and it's just bzz, 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 and I have so many tomatoes. In fact, down here, I've stopped pollinating because I have way too many tomatoes. I've given them away. I've made stuff with them. We eat them all the time. I planted way too many tomatoes. But one of the good things about planting a lot of tomatoes when you live 2 different places, well, actually, anytime, it doesn't really matter if you live 2 different places. Before I go home to Wyoming, I will pick all my green ones. I'll put them in plastic tubs, and I like to have those shallow ones so that you only have 2 layers at the most, depending on the size of your tomato. And I'll just bring them home, and we'll just eat them as they ripen. So I don't have to wait for my tomatoes in Wyoming. I can have tomatoes right away. Musgrave Family Farm says, I just found a couple of Cherokee purples. I was out of seeds. I got Cherokee purples growing in my back garden. If you need more, they're not ripe yet, but they're starting. But if you want some, I'll send you some seeds. Just send me an email with your address. Julie says, a tomato that has never been refrigerated tastes so much better. This is true. And when you buy tomatoes at the farmer's market, at a store, you pick them out of your garden, you don't have to put them in the refrigerator. You can just leave them on the counter. And in fact, I agree with Julie. They taste better if they've never been cold. And there's just so many things you can do with tomatoes. And Rudy's in here. Hello. Troy says, I'm still pulling dwarf cherry tomatoes from my last year's plants indoors. Because a tomato plant will last a long time. Like we planted our tomatoes, so they were probably this tall when we planted them in October. So basically October, November, December, January, and now it's February. So they're going into their 5th month of living as an actual plant, not from seed. I mean, they are from seed, but from the time I planted them down here. So some of the branches are starting to die back on the front tomatoes. The ones in the back, they don't get as much sun. I mean, they get sun, but not as much as in the front. And so um, they're just starting. And I have a bunch of yellows and oranges back there. And so there were some ripe ones, some small ones. And so I was watering in the garden yesterday, eating tomatoes right off the vine. It's nothing better, I tell you. And I can hardly wait for those Cherokee purples to be ready too. I just love all kinds of tomatoes. Okay, so we're going to plant them instead of buying a seedling from the store. Now, you may find some gardeners that have planted more than what they need, and so they're just going to sell off or give away some of their seedlings. That's a good place to get them. But, I go into the stores, the box stores, or the nurseries, and they want $5 for a tomato plant that's this tall. $5. That's ridiculous. That's more than a package of seeds costs. That Just don't do it. Just don't even do it. Plant your own. Go to the farmers markets. You can put on Facebook that you're looking for some hometown grown tomato seedlings. Does anybody have any extra that's for sale? And you might be really surprised because a lot of gardeners start their tomato seeds and they we have a habit of planting more than what we really need. How many tomato plants do you really need? I don't know. I always plant too many. I mean, it's me and Joe. And I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 plants in the front. I got 6 back over there, 8 over there. That's a lot of tomato plants for 2 people. But you might find somebody that will gladly even give them to you. So what are you going to do? How are you going to transplant your tomatoes? Now, there is a trick to planting a tomato. I once heard one of the extension office guys from North Dakota State University, and he was talking about planting tomatoes. And he said, if you want great tomatoes, you plant your tomato up to its ears. And that's kind of a funny saying, plant your tomatoes up to their ears. So if you got a tomato and you're thinking of them as a little person and you're planting them up to their ears, there's a lot of part of tomato that's in the ground versus what's above the ground. And so when you plant deep, you're just breaking off any of those side branches that are below the ears. So what you really want is 2 to 4 leaves on top. That's all you want. Because a tomato plant is one of those miraculous plants that whole stem that you bury in the ground it'll send roots right out from there. And so if you bury it deep, you're not just starting with this little tiny root ball that was in the plastic container. You're going to have this whole system. Now, you might say, Sandy, I don't want to dig that far down. You don't have to, because a tomato stem is very flexible. So a lot of times, if I have a long one, all I do is dig a trench and break off all those leaves up to your ears, the tomato's ears, and I just lay that down and then gently curve it up so that very top part of the tomato's up, and I cover the rest of it with soil. So I buried it to their ears. I just have to pop this up again. Troy's still picking cherry tomatoes from last year's plant indoors. Now, is that amazing or what? It's just amazing. And it's March. It's a long time. A tomato will grow a long time. It's like peppers. A pepper plant can grow 4 or 5 years. They're actually a perennial. They're not an annual. We just grow them peppers and tomatoes and different things as annuals. So now your tomato plant is growing. Do you mulch around your tomato plant? So if you got it in the ground, you've watered it in well, because you always want to water it in well, get rid of any of those air pockets, make sure all those roots are really soaked with some water so it can just drain down in there and have a good start. Do you mulch or do you not mulch? Well, there's two answers to that question. It is good to mulch around the base. It helps it from when it's raining, and if there's any bacteria or spores or fungus in the soil, um, that mulch will make it so that when the rain hits, it doesn't bounce that stuff up to the underside of your tomato plant. That is good. What is bad with mulch is if you mulch it too early. You don't really want to mulch like in Wyoming, I won't mulch my plants until it's about June 1st, June 15th, depending on the year, because I want that soil to have warmed up to at least 70, 75 degrees. If I don't, if I mulch it right away, because I say I'm planting it May 15th, soil hasn't really warmed up. It's warm enough to plant, but it hasn't really warmed up a lot. If I put that mulch right then, that tomato's roots are cold all summer long. It kind of just stunts them. It makes it so that they are not as productive as they would be otherwise. So I'm just going to hold off. I'm just going to let that tomato plant grow. Um, could I plant them in plastic? There's some people plant them in plastic. Some use black, some use clear. Um, if I was going to use plastic, which I don't usually use plastic, um, I would go with the clear. Why? Because with the clear, it can heat up that soil so well that it can kill even those weeds that start to grow. Not that the black can't do that, but the clear, which is weird because you think the black would do it more, is more effective um, to suppress those tomatoes. Now, I don't use plastic on the ground there, but what I do use is like walls of water. How many of you in the chat have ever used a wall of water? Charmaine is here. Hello, my friend. Um, how many have you ever used on a tomato plant or another plant a wall of water? Or do you know what a wall of water is? We use walls of water in Wyoming. I used them in South Dakota. I've used them different places of different gardens that I've had. And it's this plastic like cone, and it has sections. And each of these sections that are all the way around this wall of water, you put water in. And the idea is that during the day, the water heats up, or the sun heats up the water, plus the area inside the wall of water to help the tomato stay warm during the evening. A couple tricks, if it's going to be a cool evening, you're better off like throwing a towel over top, because there is an air space at that top. So if you can block that, it will hold the heat in there longer. I also made these great big cones, solar cones, at the end of last year. And so I am going to grow some of my tomatoes in those. I have determined that I am going to space my tomatoes this year 3 feet apart. If you saw those tomatoes in my back garden, those Cherokee purples, they're the most massive things ever. I mean, and big honking tomatoes on there. But the plant is just huge. I can't even hardly see my poor little tangelo that's in the middle of those. Now, do I fertilize my tomatoes? People do. you have to be careful if you give it too much nitrogen. A tomato will make lots of leaves and hardly any tomatoes. And so there has to be a balance. Um, Usually, I like to use rice water, or I will make banana fertilizer with the banana peels. I like those too. Um, I'll make a fertilizer from my worm castings. I like that kind of fertilizer on my plants. You have to just know your soil. So, is your soil lacking in anything? Don't just give a some kind of fertilizer, NPK, just because you think you have to, because you don't want to keep giving your soil that when it doesn't need it. There can become a time in your soil that you've made it toxic because you keep adding nutrients when it doesn't need nutrients. And it can get to this level that the way you can tell if it's done it a lot of times is your tomatoes growing wonderful. You know, it gets to be June and everything in your garden is dying. End of June, first part of July, everything starts to die. It's grown really well, and then all of a sudden it's like, what is happening? Sometimes the soil has become toxic. It's got too much stuff in it. And we think, oh, how can we give it too much stuff? You can. It's really interesting that how it can happen. And then you got to let that soil rest, and you got to water it well and get that stuff flushed out, and it's a whole process. An easy way to tell if that's happening is beans are so susceptible to toxic things in the soil. And if you plant and plant and plant bean seeds, and it's not just, they're just not coming up because it got too rainy or things like that. A lot of times the beans can tell you a lot of things about your soil. And like I planted beans in the back, that one row, like 3 times. It just wasn't getting enough sun. It wasn't that, because I don't hardly ever add anything to my soil. I'll add worm castings. Um, I'll add things like my homemade compost, um, eggshells. I don't add a lot of things to my soil. I I want it to, but I should caveat that I do chop and drop, or I compost anything I take out. If I'm not just chopping and dropping it right where I cut it, it's going into the compost. And then we'll chip up all that stuff that hasn't broken down, and it's going back into my garden. So it's just like a cycle. And so that's always important. Another thing about tomatoes, when a tomato is growing and then it has its branches coming out, in between the stem and the branch, another branch will come out. A little side, about 45-degree angle branch. Now, some people cut those away. They do. I find that way too much work. If you have a lot of tomatoes and you have a big garden and you have a lot of things to do, I don't cut those out. But there's a lot of people that think that's the thing you should do, and there's nothing wrong with that. So do it if you want to. But it's more work than I think it is benefit. Why? Because every time you make a cut on a tree, a plant, anything like that, anything, it's a shock to its system. It's hard on the plant. It has to take nutrients that it was using in the plant to heal that wound. So if you're cutting a whole bunch of them, it has to do all kinds of, it has to switch those cells to make them healing cells. So it's a thought. Do I do it or do I don't do it? There's, there's pros and cons of both ways. I just have a lot to do and I just don't want to. Um, Charmaine says, I want all the tomatoes I can get. Charmaine, don't you love tomatoes? I tell you, every single year when I very first get those tomatoes, You're slicing them, eating them, and it's like, oh my gosh, that's what a tomato tastes like. Because like before when we lived in just one place, just in Wyoming, and a lot of times I would keep my tomatoes for a while, you know, not keeping as long as Troy does. Um, but eventually I'm buying store-bought tomatoes. There's never the taste that there is in other tomatoes. Tomatoes that I grew or tomatoes that you buy at the farmer's market that were just picked that morning or the day before. And Philbeck is in. Hello, how are ya? So, what do you do with your tomato? It's starting to grow, right? We planted it up to its ears. Um, we watered. Now the soil's warm. It's the middle of June. We're putting mulch on it around the base. Your tomato's starting to grow. What are you going to do? There's determinate tomatoes or there's indeterminate. Now, you can grow the bush type. And for the most part, depending on how big it's getting, you may or may not use a tomato cage. But other tomatoes, they're just going to keep growing. They get tall, they get bushy. You need some kind of support. Now, you might use a tomato cage. Some people use welded wire on fence posts, and then they just tie the branches onto the tomato branches onto the welded wire. That works. Some people use just wooden stakes and they just tie the tomato as it gets larger and larger. Those things work. I think just use whatever you have. If that works, you have tomato cages, use tomato cages. If you want to just use bamboo stakes, pound them into the ground, use those. But for the most part, tomatoes need some kind of support, or they're just going to be sprawling all over the place. There's nothing wrong with them sprawling all over the place, other than the fact that sometimes when they're sitting on the soil and you have a lot of moisture, that can rot on the bottom, or you can get bugs that also like your tomatoes. And so they want to share in your produce. Down here, we have they're like little lizard, salamander-like things. They're in the garden all the time. And something had been eating my strawberries. And I thought maybe it's on the bottom side, so it's not the birds, it's not cats. So then I thought there were snails by there, and I thought, well, maybe the snails are doing it. But now I think I've come to the conclusion it's those little lizards that are eating my strawberries. And I had some tomatoes on the ground because the ones out in front, they get sun all day long. I mean, from early morning till the sun sets, they get a lot of sun. And I mean, those plants are just sprawling all over the place. And it was like, seriously, something's eating the bottom of my tomatoes and on the sides of my tomatoes. Now, I do get birds sometimes that will come and peck on my tomatoes. But then there was those little lizard things. Those buggers is right. So they were eating some of my tomatoes. I have a lot of tomatoes, so it's like, it's okay. But what I'm thinking is that, like, in front, all those tomatoes are sprawled all over. Well, some of them are on the ground, and I'm not using those tomatoes that something's been eaten on them. But I'm wondering how many tomato seeds, have fallen in between that gravel, that next year I'm going to have all these little sprouts of tomatoes coming up. It's true. Now, how are we going to, I guess, how are we going to keep all of those tomatoes that you've been growing all summer long? Well, things I do with them. I like tomato juice. I love making V8 juice from my tomatoes because then I can just grab things that are in the garden too. Peppers and carrots and onions and different things to make my V8 juice. I love that. I've canned whole tomatoes, diced tomatoes, made tomato sauce, made spaghetti sauce, made ketchup. There's just a plethora of things you can make with tomatoes. And of course, nobody turns down tomatoes. After a while, they may turn down your zucchini, but nobody ever has told me, "Oh, Sandy, I got too many tomatoes." No, thanks. I don't need any tomatoes. It's never happened. Julie says that she still has some in the freezer, both dried and oiled, pickled in the fridge. See? And I've dehydrated tomatoes. I've dehydrated it and then pulverized them so I have tomato powder that I can add to stuff. When you have a lot of tomatoes, you become very ingenious on what you're going to do with those tomatoes. But, you know, I've canned spaghetti sauce. And then when I want to make spaghetti during the part of the year that I don't have fresh tomatoes, I can just take one of those ones that I've canned. And so it's just like, it's a fabulous vegetable out of your garden. Now, technically, it's a fruit. But, you know, the reason why they classified it as a vegetable, there was a Supreme Court case that there was, I think it was a duty or a tariff or a tax or something on fruit. And it went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the court made it a vegetable. And then there was no tax on there, there's no duty on it. But it's actually a fruit. But that's okay. Anne says, I can a lot of tomato sauce because you can make a lot with that. So true. I add organic tomato paste to it for thickening. Yeah, it's just fabulous. All the different things you can do. But there's nothing better than being in your garden and just biting into a tomato. I mean, I love biting those little tiny ones. But you're just in the garden, you got a great big honking tomato, and you're just biting into it, and you got juice coming down your face and on your shirt, and it's just so delicious. In the chat, tell me your favorite all-time tomato. My favorite cherry tomato, small tomato. Well, I have two of them. In the orange variety, it's Sun Gold. I mean, they're like candy. You just eat them. That's right, Anne. You just eat lunch in my garden. I do that all the time. Oh, interesting. Now, is the San Lorenzo your favorite because you make paste out of it, sauce out of it, or do you like it as a slicer? My favorite regular tomato. That's a tough one. But probably my favorite is a pink accordion, or there's a Russian tomato that's called bread and salt. It's a massive tomato and really meaty and excellent flavor. So it really just depends on what you're doing. Julie says that she likes Romas for salads. Terrible at growing them. Now, I've grown tomatoes. Troy's favorite is Cherokee Purple. I love Cherokee Purple too. I like any of the old heirloom varieties. There's some ones, hybrids, that I've tasted that taste good too. But I like the older varieties because I can save the seeds. And they are true. They're not, because they're not cross-pollinating with another tomato, because the male and female parts are all in that flower. And when it gets vibrated, they just drop down. And it pollinates it. So it stays true. My brother and I did experiments for a lot of years. And we would take the seeds from the very first red tomato and the very last red tomato. And those would be the seeds that we saved. And we did that for many years. And what I found, and I'm sure my brother found this to be true too, is that after several years, those seeds, those tomato plants that we were continuously doing that, started ripening about 2 weeks earlier than they ever were at the beginning of the experiment. And I had tomatoes longer after we had done that for many years. So I thought that was interesting way to see how you can just do stuff with your tomatoes. But looky here, we're already at 35 minutes. So I appreciate you guys stopping in. Thanks for letting me know that I was making a mistake, because it's tomatoes tonight. Even though on my chart it says everything about lettuce. I got all kinds of notes about lettuce. Good thing I know a lot of things about tomatoes. Now remember, Charmaine says, they adapt to where they grow from eventually. They do. They become your own, you know. The pink accordions that I grow in Wyoming may not taste the same as somebody growing them in Florida. Our seasons are different, our soils are different, the direction, the angle of the sun is different. It can all make a difference. The more you store those seeds over and over and over again, changes ever so slightly. It's like I read a book once on garlic, and they said that if you say you're buying a Russian garlic, I love Russian garlic. It's got purple on the outside skin. It's potent. It grows well in Wyoming. But it said that if you continually save those bulbs, those cloves, grow them over and over again, within 7 years, they have changed enough that you could literally change the name of that garlic, because it had changed that much. Now, not all plants do that, but they said that garlic does. It changes with what's in the soil and what's not in the soil, the sun, the coldness in your winter, because I always do a hardneck garlic. So it's interesting. So Anne says, I love freckled lettuce in my hydroponics. It's very tasty. Did you know that we'll talk about this when we talk about lettuce. I was going to give you some facts about lettuce, but we're going to talk about that now in 2 weeks, because those were switched around. Next week, we're talking about carrots. And on my Monday morning, we're going to talk about building a simple raised bed. Interesting. Everybody have a great weekend. I am in art trails this weekend. And I could just go on about lettuce. Yeah. I'm in art trails. It's Friday and Saturday, 10 to 4. And you're going to go from studio to studio to studio. I'm in studio 1 with 3 other artists. And if you're in the Yuma area, come check it out in the foothills. It is totally free. And you can see the artwork from about 35 artists from actually around the country. So everybody have a great day. And thanks for stopping in. Love you guys. See you next time.